2 billion people worldwide consume insects regularly. This is roughly 30% of the world. And it's really interesting that for how many people actually consume insects, it's crazy that this practice of consuming insects has sort of been lost on the Western side of the world. And one large factor behind that is probably because when we think of eating insects, often the picture that comes to mind is this of our buddy Bear Grylls, a reality TV star who likes to make a huge deal out of finding a huge, wriggly, gross looking insect larvae and deciding to consume it whole and live and wriggling still in his mouth. And if anyone has ever seen this video, it is repulsive. The insect explodes upon contact and he just makes it into this gross ick factor. But images from this FAO document really paint an entirely different picture to insect consumption. They have pictures of cricket trapping in Laos, where they use this tin sheet and a light trap to attract crickets into a bucket to harvest. They have images of market sales of a variety of different insect species, akin to just purchasing fruits and vegetables at the farmer's market. And it's really this ick factor that has prevented the productive spread of entomophagy, or eating insects, across the western side of the world. I guess the northwestern side of the world, so I'm talking about North America. And if we take a look at food history, we can kind of see a repeat story that's happened before with new and foreign foods, such as arthropods like lobsters and shrimps, or even sushi, raw fish. These foods were once considered foreign and disgusting, but are now considered delicacies. And that's really how I think we should start thinking of edible insects, as delicacies. Because back in 2019, my partner and I were fortunate enough to be able to travel through Southeast Asia and try some insect delicacies on our own. In Cambodia, we visited a bug cafe where we got to try tarantulas, ant spring rolls, tarantula samosas, bamboo worm dumplings, cricket and silkworm pupa stir fry, and a variety of different insects on a kebab. They had condiments there to complement the different flavor profiles of all of the insects, and they really made eating insects a culinary experience. In Laos, we tried cricket, silkworm pupae, and green onion trail mix. In Thailand, we were fortunate enough to spend some time with someone who locally harvested a wasp nest for us and threw it on a barbecue and smoked it for a few hours. And we tried smoked wasp pupae, and to this day, those are the tastiest insects I've tried. Also in Cambodia, an ant and beef dish. It was delicious. The ants added a really nice citrus zing to the dish. And so rather than thinking of eating insects as an ick factor, I encourage you to think of them as a yum factor. And this is precisely how you make some really tasty dishes using insects. About a month ago, our Carleton dining services and our Carleton chefs hosted an edible insect event where they experimented with Entomo Farms cricket powder. They served cricket powder cinnamon churros, and these were gobbled up by our students. They ran out of supply before the end of the day. And Entomo Farms on their website even has suggested recipes for using cricket powder. They've got cricket breakfast crepes and even breakfast smoothies. And I have to say personally, using cricket powder as a substitution for flour is one of my favorite ways to consume insects. It's awesome. And someone that I really admire and that is worth mentioning here, although he's cut off the top right, is Chef Joseph Yoon. And he's a chef that works under the alias Brooklyn Bugs. And he works out of New York. He specializes in insect cuisine and making dishes delicious using insects. So on the left, we have ant and cricket tiramisu. We have in the middle cream of mushroom soup where he used cricket powder instead of veg stock. And on the bottom right, cicada nymph kimchi. And Chef Yoon actually made a name for himself last year during the periodical cicada emergencies, where he would go out and actively harvest different life stages of cicadas, and found that there were actually different flavor profiles associated with different life stages of insects. So this is really an untapped potential of taste, flavor profiles, and nutritional profiles. And if I still haven't convinced you that insects can be delicious, well, to that I just say too bad. You're consuming them anyways. I love to include these stats in my talks because it comes as a surprise that we're unknowingly already consuming insects. So this is some data that the US Food and Drug Administration, or actually guidelines, not data, that they provide for any food production company. And so there's an allowable number of insect fragments per gram of food. So in beer, there's an average of more than 2,500 aphids allowed per 10 grams of hops. There's an average of 30 or more insect fragments per 100 grams of peanut butter. Even cinnamon, and I hate to break it to you, but also chocolate. Any one subsample of chocolate can contain 90 or more insect fragments. So that's my intro to insects as food and feed. But now I'd like to move into why. Well, the FAO document claims that by the year 2050, our world's population is estimated to reach around 10 billion people. And our current agricultural model is not positioned to adequately feed this many people. Our food production would actually need to double. Land is scarce, oceans are overfished, and agriculture is one of the leading causes of climate change. And so we need to find new ways of growing food, and insects are one potential solution. Now, the mass rearing of insects is not a new thing. Insects have been mass reared or farmed, if you would, throughout history. Honeybees are one great example. Silkworms are probably our world's oldest domesticated insect. It produces silk for the textile industry. But we also rear millions and millions of beneficial parasitoids for use in agriculture to deal with insect pests. But now with the edible insect movement, we have 3 new groups or species of insects on the scene. Crickets, for one, and this right here is Glotis sigillatus, or the banded cricket. And this is my model organism and also the commercial species raised and sold by Entomo Farms. There are a couple other cricket species that are reared for commercial sale, but today we'll be focusing on Glotis. A black soldier fly is another one, and it's quickly rising as a superstar in the edible insects industry. I won't be discussing a lot of black soldier fly today, but there's a ton of research coming out, and there's just a lot of attention being put on black soldier fly as a potential source for agricultural feed. And the third star are mealworms. So why eat crickets? Well, on a per gram basis, crickets are extremely healthy. They're a very nutritious source of protein. Compared to beef, they contain about 3 times more protein. Compared to salmon, they have about 10 times more vitamin B12. There's twice as much iron than spinach, twice as much calcium than a glass of milk, and around 3 times more potassium than bananas. And not only are they extremely healthy for you, but they're extremely sustainable. They require around 2,000 times less water to produce the same amount of protein in our conventional sources of protein. They also emit 80 times less methane. So greenhouse gases are a problem associated with agriculture and contributing to climate change. But insects are also extremely efficient at converting feed into protein. And on average, they require about 12 times less feed. And this figure here from a review paper from 2017 really summarizes this information. So our shaded outlines of animals with the percentages inside represent how much of that animal is actually edible. And if we look at chickens, pigs, and cows, we can see that around only half of the animal is edible. The rest goes to waste. With insects, we consume most of the animal. Common processing techniques are to remove legs and wings because they're not seen as that edible. They're not very appetizing, I should say. And so most of the animal is used. And so if we look at the green squares, we get a better idea of how much land space is actually conserved when we're using and rearing insects. Food is represented by the yellow, by the wheat symbol, and also water represented by the water droplets. And we can just see how efficient insects are and sustainable to rear. And there's a concept behind raising insects as food and feed, and a sustainable food concept that says insects contribute to a circular system. So we can raise crickets and produce protein or a food product for us to consume. There's a very valuable byproduct associated with insect production, especially crickets, called frass. And frass is a combination of insect feces, shed exoskeletons, and spilled feed. But frass is a powerful organic fertilizer that you can then use to rear more food to then feed your crickets, and the process repeats itself. In addition to that, there is strong potential for farmed insects to act as waste converters. So you can rear insects on food waste and then produce more food for ourselves. So they're extremely efficient recyclers. Okay, moving on to who. So who's making insects? Well, I've already mentioned them, but Entomo Farms. Entomo Farms is a cricket production company that started in 2014. They were started by the three Golden brothers, and pictured here is Darren, the farm manager. And the Golden brothers arrived from South Africa in 1986, and were always interested in rearing animals. They started in the pet feeder industry, but like me, came across the FAO document and realized that they had the skill set and the potential to rear insects, specifically crickets, en masse. Fast forward to today, and they run 3 of these massive CFL-sized barns outside of Norwood, Ontario. They have an average harvest of around 8 million crickets a week, and their crickets are free roam. So picture there inside the barn with Darren are millions and millions of crickets. The crickets live in those cardboard partitions, sort of like the egg cardboard. Your eggs come in. The feed boards sit on top of the partitions. The crickets love to hang out in the shadowy spaces in between the partitions, and they come out to feed and drink water and then go about as they please. Entomo Farms also has a processing facility a short drive away where they produce a variety of different products. So one, I've already mentioned cricket powder. And if you shop at Loblaws or the Superstore, you may have already seen cricket powder there under the President's Choice brand, but this is just Entomo Farms cricket powder rebranded. They also sell whole roasted crickets. So pictured here is cinnamon sugar flavor, a similar flavor profile to the churros that we served. So if you are going to buy some, I highly suggest those ones. They taste really good. But Entomo Farms also outsources their cricket products to other companies that make different products, such as protein bars in the top right. And just recently, their newest product are cheese puffs in the bottom right, and those are awesome. It's a new favorite snack in my house. My dog even loves them. Really, really tasty. And recently, we have a second major company popping up and rearing crickets in Ontario. So this is Aspire Food Group. They're a US-based company specializing in animal feed, and they've reared crickets before in the States. But the past few years, production has really accelerated for them. They're the recipients of multi-million-dollar grants to produce the world's first fully automated insect protein manufacturing site in London, Ontario, and the world's largest edible cricket facility. They're aiming to start production in Q1 or Q2 of this year, so production could be underway as we speak. And their goal is to produce 12 million kilos of crickets annually. So we have these two major players in the global cricket market right here in Ontario. And it's really exciting to see new competition starting to arise, and it's really healthy competition for the market. You might be wondering, though, how are these companies prospering if you yourself haven't tried edible insect protein products yet, or are not regularly shopping for insect protein products? Well, Entomo Farms and Aspire are not only farming crickets for humans, but as humans are just a small fraction of the target market industry for insects as food and feed. A major market is pet food. Pictured on the left and in the middle are products from the Montreal-based company Wild Harrier, and they specialize in dog food and dog treats made with insect protein. Jiminy's is a US-based company doing the exact same thing. Also, aquaculture and animal feed are major market sources for edible insects. Many conventional feeds for these animals use fish meal and soy as protein sources, both of which are not really sustainable sources of protein. Soy is one of the biggest monocrops in the world, and it relies heavily on pesticides. And fish meal is made from wild-caught marine fish and bycatch, and we know how stressed and overfished our oceans are. Insect ingredients for animal feed in the US, Canada, and the European Union were given approval in 2018. So animals are already being fed edible insects, or just insects. Research is ongoing into the dietary benefits of different farm-raised insect species, on farm-raised animals, but signs are extremely promising. And as our industry develops and moves forward, there are some dire needs that industry needs from research. So earlier in 2021, the North American Coalition for Insect Agriculture held its annual public meeting earlier in the year. And this person on the right, Dr. Virginia Emery, is the CEO of Beta Hatch, a very successful cricket company in the States. And she delivered an excellent presentation titled The Reverse Pitch, What Industry Needs from Academia. Because usually us as academics are trying to sell some research that we can do to move an industry forward. But Virginia had an awesome presentation where she really outlined the needs that the industry needs from us. So she highlighted some areas that research can really help the edible insect industry. Genomics, breeding, and gene editing. There's very strong potential to optimize insect rearing using gene editing. Microbiome work. So understanding the diversity of gut microbiota in insects can really help us understand how we can enhance growth and rearing. Environmental management systems. Insects are raised in extremely humid and hot environments, and the HVAC technology and infrastructure is not really there yet for massive insectaries. Each facility, it's really just a trial and error system, trying to use whatever technologies they have to make things work. Or if there is technology, it's proprietary. Ooh. I'd like to highlight these last two areas of industry needs. Development of new feedstocks and pest control, because these are two areas that I'm hoping to address throughout the rest of my PhD work. And that leads me into the research that's ongoing here at Carleton. So I'm fortunate to have two awesome supervisors. You've met Heath at the start of this talk, but I'm also co-advised by Dr. Sue Bertram. And together, we're looking at how we can use nutritional ecology to enhance and optimize the rearing of Grillodes sigillatus. So some cricket farms, especially small and medium scale farms, will use whatever feed is available and consumed by the insects. If the insects eat it, grow, and reproduce, they'll keep using it. This can keep production costs low, but it can lead to lower yield and impact nutrient quality of the actual crickets. You know, the old saying is you are what you eat. Well, that is especially true for insects. From previous research in insect nutritional ecology, we know that dietary sources of protein and carbohydrates can have really strong life history effects. From previous research, we know that dietary proteins are essential for body maintenance and tissue growth, directly resulting in higher growth rates and increased egg production. It can also result in behavioral changes, such as increased mate calling. So here we have a male cricket bending and rubbing his wings together to call for a mate. It can also result in increased female mate choice. So the ability of females to assess males as high quality mates. And it can also result in longer lifespans. We also know that dietary carbohydrates are a fuel source for activity. And so their availability influences overall behavior and activity levels, and thus indirectly resulting in energy allocation towards body size development. However, much of this research has been used in many different species of crickets. But we know from research that I've just finished that different species have very different dietary requirements. So I started my PhD in January of 2020. I spent about 3 months on campus, and then the COVID-19 pandemic hit. I had some very big aspirations to do some genetics and hope maybe gene editing work using crickets, but we had to make a pivot in our research plans because of the pandemic. Campus was shut down, so we had to decide on a new project. One morning, Sue sent me this paper, Body Enlarging Effect of Royal Jelly in a Non-Hollow Metabolist Insect Species, Gryllus bimaculatus. And for your knowledge, that's a cricket species. These scientists decided to feed royal jelly to their crickets and see what happens. So royal jelly, pictured on the right, is the nutrient-rich fluid secreted by nurse honeybees. And when royal jelly is fed to larvae, it results in queen differentiation, including larger body size and longer life expectancy. So first, these researchers fed a variety of different amounts of royal jelly to their crickets, and they found that there was actually a dose-dependent response, with body size being maximized with around a 15% royal jelly diet. And they found that both males and females grew larger bodies. We thought this was a really cool experiment and could be a really nice way for me to get comfortable with the effects that diet could have on our own study species, Grillodes sigillatus. So Heath drove to campus, packed up an incubator into his car, a scale, and also a USB microscope camera, and delivered them to my house. Entomo Farms had eggs delivered to my front doorstep, and I was off and running. I decided to replicate this experiment to see if we could use royal jelly to also increase the body size of Grillodes sigillatus. So I maintained around 100 individual crickets in their individual bed and breakfast. Each cricket had a single piece of egg carton, their own water stopper, and a dish of food. And I fed crickets either a diet consisting of 15% royal jelly or just their regular diet. I monitored and tracked the body size and weight of every single cricket for around 5 weeks. So I measured head width, thorax width, and thorax length. And at the end of 5 weeks, I analyzed my results. So here's a figure of male mass, which is on the y-axis, and days after hatch on the x-axis. So over 5 weeks, we track cricket development. The purple line or pink line is representative of those crickets that were fed the royal jelly diet, and the green line is representative of those crickets fed the normal diet. And we had no effect. There were no differences in male body weight between the two diets. However, when we looked at females, we had an effect. We had an effect over time. So female crickets grew heavier, they grew heavier faster, and so there was a strong effect of royal jelly. It's really interesting. And upon further inspection, I decided to dissect the females and count their eggs. We found there was a strong effect of diet on the number of eggs produced. Female crickets that were fed royal jelly produced 66% more eggs compared to those that were fed the basal diet. So in summary, after feeding our study species, Grylobes sigillatus, a 15% royal jelly diet, we had a female-only effect. Females grew heavier, had a larger body size, and they grew faster. And they also produced 66% more eggs. And these results are different from Mia's sheet of paper, the one that Sue sent to me that morning, where they had enlarged male and female. And this really highlights that dietary effects are species specific, and it reinforces the need for nutritional studies for each of these species of insects that we aim to farm. And that leads me into the next chapter of my PhD research. So back in 2014, Sarah Harrison, a previous PhD student and now postdoc in Sue's lab, produced her major results from her PhD thesis. And she analyzed the effects of different amounts of proteins, carbohydrates, and phosphorus on field cricket fitness. And what she found was that a variety of different life history traits were maximized on diets with different ratios of protein to carbohydrates. She found that traits such as lifespan and male calling behavior were maximized on carbohydrate diets, whereas increased body size was maximized on a slightly higher protein diet, and eggs were maximized on a high protein diet. The past 8 months leading up to December, myself and an amazing team of undergraduate researchers planned a massive experiment where we tested 21 different diets, all differing in protein and carbohydrate ratios, and raised close to 1,000 crickets individually and tracked their body size development and survival on all of these diets. It was a ton of work, and I was so fortunate to have these awesome students to work with. Unfortunately, I don't have that data to share with you today, but it's looking like that slightly higher protein to carbohydrate ratio was the most beneficial. We had highest survival on those diets. We had the shortest amount of time to adulthood on those diets. So the data is promising. But as I leave you today, there are a few takeaways that I'd like you to take from my talk. One, crickets are a nutritious and sustainable source of protein, really healthy for you, and they're good for the planet. Ontario is growing as a global leader in cricket production. Watch out for these two companies. Crickets are delicious and they're easy to cook with. And finally, successful collaborations between industry and academia, such as our research partnership with Entomo Farms, will drive insects as food and feed forwards. Thanks to all of the students that have been and are still involved with my research. I'm about halfway through my PhD. There's still a lot more work to be done, a lot more data to look at, and a couple more experiments to run. So I'm hoping that I'll have the chance to meet with you all again one day and discuss the final results of my work. But until then, here are some resources on the right side of the PowerPoint if you want to learn more, or if you ever want to get into contact with me. I'm always excited and willing to discuss insects as food and feed. So I'm looking forward to your questions now, and I hope we can have a productive discussion.
All right, thanks so much, Matt. It was really interesting perspective from a number of different angles coming in there. Okay, so we've got a bunch of questions coming in, so we'll just kind of go through in the order that they came in. First question is whether insect-based foods are affordable, I guess, in kind of your opinion. Are they at that stage now? Do you think they will be at that stage one day?
Sure. Yeah. So and define affordable, but right now they're a bit more expensive. They're still considered a specialty product. I mean, you'll find them in like the health food sections of stores where the higher price specialty products are, but that's only because of supply and demand. I expect to see that price decrease as we have more people producing insects, especially with that Aspire food facility. I would imagine that the price of insects will start to decrease as we get more availability of products.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right on that. Another question is, are there any insect protein producers in other provinces, so outside of Ontario? I think out west there's one, isn't there?
Yeah, there's one in BC. There used to be one called Cowboy Crickets in BC. I don't know if they're still working under that name, but there's definitely a farm outside in BC. Their name eludes me right now. I can get that to you, Aaron.
Is that Enterra?
Oh, yeah. Enterra's on the west
that
coast.
them? Enterra? Yeah, okay. Okay, another question. This is an interesting one for you. Is how much of your diet is composed of insects?
Great question. Depends on the week. Depends what I'm eating. So like I said, my favorite method of consumption is cricket powder. You can bake with it, and you can substitute some of the regular flour for the cricket powder. So like if you're making pancakes, if you're making bread, you can replace a tablespoon of flour with a tablespoon of cricket powder. A little goes a long way in terms of the nutrient benefits you can gain from cricket powder. I'll toss it in a smoothie. We can toss it in a marinade too. Entomo Farms has a list of recipes if you want to get creative. But yeah, so I would say I regularly consume cricket protein on a week-by-week basis, but it's not every single day.
Right. So one thing you kind of touched on early on, but maybe you can speak to a little bit more is kind of the why insect consumption is less popular in Western countries. There's some research that's been done on this in the past, but it's not our particular area of expertise.
No, I'd say the major one is the Ick factor and just sort of the stigma associated with eating insects. You know, it's kind of thought that they're dirty or they're gross. So you're going to get sick from eating them. That they're associated with viruses. But the food industry, especially in Canada and the United States, is a heavily regulated industry. It's not too often something makes it to market that is deemed unsafe and sold in name brand grocery stores. So am I telling you to go in with blind faith? No. You can find information about the food safety on insects. They are safe. And I thought about including a slide about safety, but I figured I'd let someone ask about it. But most insect pathogens don't even affect humans because of the really big differences between these groups. Some bacteria and fungi do, but I mean, it's just like any food in the food production system. All food can spoil in some way, but it's just about preserving them in the proper way and keeping them in good condition.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that always, I find striking is when you as a biologist, to look at trees of relationships among organisms, and we now know, in the last 5 or 10 years, we've learned that insects and crustaceans are really closely related. So, we're totally fine with eating shrimp and crabs and lobsters, which, for all intents and purposes, are insects. They're just aquatic insects instead of terrestrial insects. But we have this barrier that we can't get past very easily about eating land bugs. Can you speak at all to allergies, insect allergies?
Yeah, I can talk a bit about it. There's warning labels on insect products that warn if you're allergic to shellfish, that you probably shouldn't consume insects, because I think it's the same allergen. It's chitin, which is it's a protein found in the exoskeletons of arthropods. So if you're allergic to shellfish, don't consume insects. There are some records, and we've actually experienced this before in the Bertram lab of students, actually in Heath's lab too, with students that have developed an allergy towards live crickets. and it's thought that it's affected by dust that are created when you're mass rearing insects in a very big environment. They call it the dander, and some people develop allergies to this. I don't know about the safety if someone who's allergic to cricket dander, if they can consume cricket products. I'm not sure. It's a good question.
Okay, so one thing you didn't touch on too much in this, because the focus was really on crickets here, but one of the questions is what other insects are being raised for food and feed?
Sure. Black soldier fly, I like to call it the superstar of the edible insect industry. It's getting all the attention. It's getting all the publications. I think it's because it's really easy to rear. So it's a fly, and its larval stage is a maggot. And so if you think about the ability of crickets to disperse, they can jump, they can kind of fly, they can move really quickly. But larvae, maggots, you can keep in a bin. So you can keep them in a confined space. It's a lot easier to manage that way. They also have, I think, a bit higher feed efficiency conversion than crickets. So you get more yield based on the amount of feed that you're feeding black soldier fly. But I don't think I've seen any products for human consumption made from black soldier fly. They're really being targeted towards like agricultural feed.
I can imagine a lot of that has to do with the ick factor, because you're dealing with things that are maggots, right? So
yeah,
it's very unlikely that people are going to be excited to eat them.
Yeah, and yeah, I've seen that in published literature too, where people are more averse to eating something that is maggot-like. So that's why I guess mealworms and black soldier fly have not really kicked off as for human consumption. But.
Right. So question here about your own research. You said that the female crickets fed royal jelly make more eggs. Do you know if the crickets that hatch from those eggs are bigger?
Oh, excellent question. No, I don't know. We only ran that experiment for one generation. Would have been really cool to keep it going generation after generation after generation. And those were some experiments that I started out really wanting to do and look at generational effects of diet. But we didn't do it. When you're trying to do lab work during a pandemic and there's the potential for campus and resources to be shut down at any moment, we were trying to plan experiments to be as efficient as possible and not setting it up for disaster. It would suck if we had an experiment running for 3 or 4 months only to have it be shut down and lose everything. So it's a great question. I would love to know it.
Maybe it's something we can address in the future.
Yeah.
So what do you think is needed to grow the industry, the entomophagy industry in Canada? Does it need more support to help the industry grow or scale, consumer industry uptake, new research to drive costs down?
Excellent question.
It's a great question for the Golden brothers at Entomo Farms. They probably have lots of ways to answer this question.
Yeah, they do. So yeah, I have a very limited industry experience. I was fortunate enough to work at Entomo Farms for 2 months last year, but I don't think I have enough experience to answer that. More support, sure. I would like to see more federal granting directly catered towards alternative sources of protein, and maybe startup money for others to start farming insects on their own. I think I would like to see more funding towards academics too, for us to keep researching this. I think our group here in Carleton is really the only, I don't want to say the only, but there is no main insects as food and feed lab group in Canada. NACEA exists, the Coalition for Insects for Agriculture, that I talked about in the presentation, but it's mostly American academics that are a part of this coalition. And this is something that I hope to change in the next 5 to 10 years of my career, but we'll see. Only time will tell.
All right. So what's next here? You said that cricket farms are using whatever technology they have at their disposal to farm. Are there specific policies or regulations that they have to follow? Certain protocols?
That's a good question. I'm not actually too sure.
My understanding is they are quite regulated by the food industry. So that would be the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency.
Yeah,
just like
that's
any
a good
food
point.
product.
I know that they are prone to frequent inspections of their farms to make sure that like food safety policies are being followed. Entomo Farms likes to boast too that their food processing facility so that there's certain levels of certification that food processing facilities can achieve, and they like to boast that they have the highest standard possible because they are aware of the stigma associated with eating insects, and they want to make sure that there is no doubt that their products are safe.
Right. Next question is, are there pests of cricket farms? We're getting lots of great questions in here. So, are there pests of cricket farms, and can we use biocontrol agents on them?
Excellent question. There are some pests of cricket farms. This is hopefully going to be the last chapter of my PhD. Some of this information is proprietary, and we can't actually talk about it yet, but I will say that any time that you're rearing an organism, be it an animal or a plant, en masse at a scale of millions and millions of individuals in one localized environment, you're going to have pests attracted to that environment. It's a massive resource for other organisms, and you're going to have pests. So yes, there are pests. There is basically no literature or research on how to handle pests of insect farms.
Yeah, another one of these big questions that is open for a lot of research. Okay. I see 2 posters of butterflies behind you. Have you always been interested in insects outside of your PhD?
Not always. I became really interested in insects when I took a 3rd-year undergrad course in insect diversity at the University of Guelph. I was really interested after that, but then the following summer, I was accepted into a field entomology course where we went to Missouri for 2 weeks and basically ran around the woods, catching and photographing bugs and observing insect behavior. And after that, I was hooked. It was so much fun, and it kind of felt like I knew what I wanted to do after that.
It's about finding that opportunity to just get involved in something and finding your passion.
Yeah, we have an excellent insect diversity course here at Carleton. I TA'd it last semester. It was online. It was still great, but if you have an opportunity in the future to take it in person, I would highly suggest it. It's really great. It's a great introduction into insects, and hopefully I'm going to be associated with it for the next few years.
So kind of a logistical question, not necessarily our particular area of expertise, but how do you separate insect waste from edible protein? Anything just that you can say to that? I know it's done. I'm not sure of the actual mechanism that's done.
They wash the crickets at the processing facility. They have really fine shower heads, and they wash them all over and over and over again. They roast them, and then I don't know if the process is repeated. I doubt they would wash them again after roasting, but
probably not.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting question for the companies that are actually doing this. And maybe a great one for us to kind of close on is in all of your travels, what's the yummiest insect-based treat that you have had?
The Wasp PB for sure. We were genuinely surprised at how tasty they were, and we just kept popping them like popcorn, and we finished the small nest between 4 of us. They were just fantastic, and barely anything was done to them. They just smoked them. It was full of flavor.
One of the amazing things about insects, is like they're the most diverse group of animals on the planet, right? So we can think about how different chicken meat is from beef, for example, but we're not talking things. They're both vertebrates. They're both relatively closely related in the grand scheme of things, but there are 6 million species of beetles alone on this planet that we're aware of, so there's an enormous amount of potential out there for future food products, and they all probably taste different.
Yeah, the numbers that we're sitting at right now, the most recent number was, there was a paper published this year. The most recent number of recorded edible insect species is somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 edible species.
Right. Yeah, it's incredible. Okay. Well, I think that about does it.
Well, my dad's got a question in there.
Oh yeah, sorry, I need to scroll down. Entomo and Aspire are competitors, but is there potential for collaboration, especially at this early stage of adoption and development of crickets for food?
That's a great question. I know that the industry leaders within this field are all quite friendly with one another and communicate on a weekly basis. They know that they're in this together, and they know that they still have a lot of work to do to get this industry to where they want it to be. So I think it's friendly and it's healthy competition. I'm not sure about actual collaborations, but I can say that I know that there are some personal relationships between the people involved.
Yeah, and I know in a big growth industry like this, there's a lot of opportunities that come up, and it couldn't go either way. There can be a lot of competition, or there can be a lot of collaboration, and yeah, it depends on who's involved. I hope so. I hope there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration and a lot of opportunities for sharing information, because a huge number of people who are interested in this and can leverage information from each other to rapidly advance this area. Okay, well, I think we'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. I'm coming back, the voice of God here, to thank you, Heath, and yourself, Matt, for a great presentation today, and thank the audience for a lot of great questions. A full recording will be made available by the end of the week, and it will be posted to science.carleton.ca, our website, in the event section, so look for it there. I'm hoping to have a full written transcription from today, which I'm happy to share out as well. Just pop a note to odscomms@carleton.ca, and I will respond in kind. So yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very much. Oh, you know what? I did have one question. Well, I had a couple of questions actually,
Sure.
but I did have a question about the mealworms. It surprised me, and that mealworms took up, is it more land space than crickets in farming? Did you say that?
Let's see what the figure looks like.
Yeah, and I just wondered
sure
if it does take more land space, then why would it? And is there active research being undertaken on create mealworms harvesting?
We've got about 5 square meters less for mealworms than crickets, than orthopterans. But
yeah. And so I did get that backwards, and that makes good sense, certainly. And is there active research being undertaken on using mealworms as an alternative food source?
Yeah, I've seen a small number of research groups that are specialized in mealworm production, and they've done some similar nutrition work to us in mealworms. So yeah, there is active research in mealworms.
Such an interesting area of study. You're very fortunate, and we're fortunate again to have had you share your work with us today. So again, thank you very much. It's been a long day online for you, I know, and so I'm going to let you go without further ado. And enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, and good evening.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.